We're moving into the urgency of bridging. The highly politicized fragility of bonds across race, class, gender, identity, geography, movements, and imagination require the courage of unapologetically crossing lines of difference. Can we bridge fast and far enough to meet the urgent challenges of the day? Climate change, rising authoritarianism, white supremacy, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, misogyny. The speakers in this panel will present present-day examples of their efforts to bridge across differences towards an expansive we and a society where everyone belongs. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for this panel. They are just such a warm and loving human. Aparna has worked for social change and expanded democracy with immigrant, refugee, and young people of color for over 25 years. She is the former co-executive director of Power California, which was formerly Mobilize the Immigrant Vote. And why vote? You know them. Yep. Shout it up. Clap it up. Great work. And is now senior advisor for the organization. Under her leadership, they've organized statewide campaigns reaching over 500,000 young people, immigrants and refugee voters of color specifically. They built long-term infrastructure and capacity of grassroots immigrant and refugee organizations across the state to run electoral and issue campaigns, and established a sister organization, Power CA Action. She's a Levi Strauss Foundation Pioneers and Justice Fellow. She sits on the board of 18 Million Rising. She holds a Master of Health Sciences from Johns Hopkins. She was born in Manila, grew up in Mumbai, and now lives with her family in Oakland, California. Her son is the amazing young person who came and asked the question on the first day of Haben. You remember him, Koyo? Yes. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the stage Aparna Shah. Please give it up.
Magandang hapon. That means good afternoon in Tagalog. So, magandang hapon.
Yes, rebrand.
Day 3, afternoon. We have been moved by dance, by prayer, by ritual, by people's spirits, by all of who people are, and the 7 generations before, and the 7 generations ahead. So, magandang hapon. Thank you. We are here right now to talk about the urgency of bridging, and we have an amazing, amazing panel. I'm so excited to share, and I am a total fangirl for all of these 4 amazing people who are going to come on the stage. So the first person I'm going to talk about is Ben McBride and Jennifer Martinez with Pico, California. Ben is a native of San Francisco and a longtime activist for peace and justice in the Bay Area. In 2008, he relocated his family to a hard neighborhood in Oakland called the Kill Zone to understand and respond to the epidemic of gun violence firsthand. In 2012, Ben was an instrumental component of relaunching Oakland's first successful iteration of Operation Ceasefire. This strategy has contributed heavily to a near 40% reduction in homicides over the last 5 years. Over the last 3 years, he's trained over 100 departments and law enforcement executives while in partnership with California's Department of Justice. Ben joined Pico, California in 2015, the state's largest community organizing network, and currently serves as co-director. He funded the Trust Through Reform Project, a statewide initiative in 14 cities to address the community-police relationship while serving as the co-chair for the Department of Justice's Racial and Identity Profiling Advisory Board. Ben is deeply committed to widening the circle of human concern, if you can't already tell, leading to a more vibrant, inclusive society. He and his wife, Janelle, have been married for 19 years and have 3 daughters. They live here in Oakland, California. Ben McBride. Jennifer Martinez, sitting next to Ben, is brilliant and amazing and is the Chief Strategy Officer for Pico, California. She's been an organizer since 2001, when her work was focused on housing justice, immigrant rights, restorative justice, and quality education. Today, Jennifer and her team work with dozens of organizations and hundreds of organizers across California to develop long-term strategies that tackle the systemic drivers of racial and economic inequality. She has a BA from Stanford, an MA and PhD from the University of Nottingham, England. Her graduate research focused on social movement strategies in the struggle for housing and land rights in Venezuela and South Africa. She was born into a Mexican-Irish family in Southern California and now lives here in the Bay Area. How lucky for us. If we could cue up the Pico video and just to show that first.
As people of faith and values, we believe in the possibility of renewal and rebirth. We invite you on a journey in 2019 to reimagine a Pico, California, rooted in equity and inclusion that allows us to co-create a roadmap for our work into a more powerful future.
With your help over the next 12 months, we will develop a shared vision and blueprint that guides our efforts over the next 10 years to become a new people, with stronger organizations ready to take on the challenges before us.
We believe that the wrong first question is, what do we need to do? The right first question is, who do we need to become? And how does that becoming work inform our strategy so that we are truly building a new California where everyone belongs, everyone thrives, and everyone has agency over their lives?
And we have the systems and structures that protect that reality. We are in a time where the dominant narrative is that the only way we can be safe is to segregate ourselves from people who are different from us, to dig in our heels around defending our uniqueness and increasing our suspicion of our neighbors.
But this next year will be about the opposite for us. 2019 will be the year of becoming and belonging in California, where we are building deep relationships with each other across difference, and we are strengthening our skills so that our voter engagement efforts are changing hearts and minds and helping us awaken 1 million more voters by 2020.
We will be passing laws that will protect the most vulnerable among us, that will be responsive to families victimized by police violence, families separated by detention and incarceration, and ensuring every Californian has a roof over their head.
These next 2 years are some of the most critical of our lifetimes as we prepare to define who we want to be and where we want to go in the future, as communities, as a people, as California.
Ben's really loving seeing himself and hearing himself right there. The next two panelists we have are Desmond Meade and Neal Voles from the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. I'm going to read their bios, but first I'm going to tell you all what I told them in the green room. This campaign, this coalition that they built, and this enduring movement is one of the absolute highlights, not just of 2018, but of like the last decade.
Yeah.
1.8 plus million folks who are part of the carceral system who now have the right to vote in Florida.
Oh, man.
So my little immigrant fangirl heart is forever indebted to you all. Desmond Meade, JD, is a formerly homeless returning citizen who overcame many obstacles to become the current executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. He's the chair of Floridans for a Fair Democracy, chair of the Florida Coalition on Black Civic Participation's Black Men's Roundtable, and a graduate of Florida International University School of Law. As president of the FRRC and chair of Floridians for a Fair Democracy, Desmond led the successful Amendment 4 campaign, which established voting rights for over, this says 1.4 million, my number evidently was wrong, Floridians with a prior felony conviction. A sought-after speaker, Desmond has been invited to speak for national entities and events such as the APSA Inequality, Democracy, and America's Future event, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, the 2018 UNRIG Summit, and Bread for the World. He's also testified before congressional members and staff and was a part of the delegation to the United Nations, where he gave testimony regarding disenfranchisement in Florida. He's a frequent guest and contributor on national news outlets and has appeared on Full Frontal with Samantha Bee, Al Jazeera, Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, MSNBC's AM Joy Reid, and MSNBC's former Melissa Harris Perry show. Mr. Meade has served as a columnist for the Huffington Post, interviewed by journalists from publications such as Color Lines, The Atlantic, Politic 365, The Washington Post, Orlando Sentinel, and The New York Times. He's married and has 5 beautiful children. Next to him, Neal Voles has more than 25 years of experience working as a public servant and community advocate, including work as the Chief of Staff for a congressional member and Staff Director for a full congressional committee, as well as Outreach Director for one of the fastest growing churches in the country and Program Director for a leading community-based organization that serves formerly homeless veterans. When in Washington, Neal helped negotiate and secure passage for the Help America Vote Act, which improved voting accessibility and accuracy for millions of people. You notice a trend? Neal received his Bachelor of Science degree from Ohio State, lives in Fort Myers, Florida with his wife, Pam, and is the chairman of the Lee County Homeless Coalition. Neal Voles. Can we cue up the FRRC video, please?
Amendment 4 is a constitutional amendment that will restore the eligibility to vote for individuals who have previously been convicted of a felony offense. The requirement is that they must complete all portions of their sentence as ordered by a judge, and once that occurs, then they're able to have the eligibility to vote. The amendment, however, would not apply to individuals who are convicted of murder or individuals who are convicted of felony sexual offenses. It is so easy in Florida to get a felony conviction. You know, something as simple as burning a tire in public or driving with a suspended license or releasing helium-filled balloons. Those things can allow someone to get a felony conviction, and if they live in Florida, that they would lose their rights for life.
You see that play out in the court system. 75% of the people who are sentenced with felony convictions actually aren't sentenced to prison. So people are in our communities, in our church pews, sometimes our pastors, our bosses, they're working with us, they're at school. And so this really is something that impacts everybody.
The reality is in Florida, African Americans only account for 1/3 of the people who have lost their rights to vote. And when you talk about people who are in prison, we have to understand that Florida convicts over 170,000 people each year. Out of that 170,000, less than 25% are even sentenced to prison. So the overwhelming majority of people who we're talking about who are impacted are people who, number one, do not look like me, and number two, are not coming out of prison. And so that just destroys that narrative or that myth that was built on this thing that, well, African Americans always get in trouble. They're the majority of the people in prison. This is for people that are in prison, so therefore African Americans are going to vote Democrat. We are fighting just as hard, if not harder, for that person that wished they could have voted for Donald Trump as that person that wanted to vote for Barack Obama. What we care about is that once you've completely served all portions of your sentence, that you be given the opportunity to have your voice heard.
So we're here today to talk, of course, about bridging and the urgency of bridging. Particularly across, let me take a step back. Just a reminder, on Monday, brothers Vincent and Lewis reminded us that we're on traditional Ohlone land, that this is the home of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, and they speak the Chochenyo language, and this is the Ho-Chun area. Thank you for allowing us to be here. One more time. We're here to talk about bridging across differences, about listening, about engaging, about organizing, about practicing, at the heart of it, about building power and love with each other and with ourselves. We're here to talk about the bigger we, because this is what everyone on this stage has been creating and what we are all doing here collectively, about where we all belong and about our collective power to co-create. Auntie Casey, I hope I can call her that, this morning said to us, "This is the beginning of the future that we are creating together." This is where we are going to talk about building and strengthening relationships, about struggle, solidarity, and liberation together, and how we move ultimately at the speed of trust. Everyone before you today has been, for decades now, building shared infrastructure, reclaiming folks who have been in the carceral system as part of the bigger we, and building beloved community across partisan, faith, ethnic, racial, and the many ways that we break with each other and we break our interdependence with each other. Sister Haben on Monday reminded us that it is communities who create inclusion, who create belonging, and when we choose to be inclusive and to belong with each other, we role model that for the rest of our communities, and we influence others to make that choice. So, saying that, I'm wondering, Desmond, if you can tell us a little bit about why. Why was this the work that you were called upon? Why is it that you felt this need, this urgent need for bridging? And what was the reaction from both peers, from opposition, and from your people?
Thank you so much for that question. Testing, mic check. All right. What I said was thank you so much for that question. I think that why started in the depths of hell, in the depths of darkness. When I found myself standing in front of railroad tracks, waiting on a train to come so I can jump in front of it. At the time, I was homeless. I was addicted to drugs. I was recently released from prison, and I didn't see any hope, any light at the end of the tunnel. But that moment there, when I was waiting and thinking about the pain that I had to suffer, I think speaks to the why. And the reason why I say that is because coming from that space, eventually the train didn't come, as you can tell, and I did cross those tracks. But it created a moment where, number one, I had to ask what my purpose was in life, because nobody would have came to my funeral if I would have died that day on those tracks. But it also started that journey, understanding that as I'm a person of Christian faith, and as a child of God, that my purpose here was to give back. And it wasn't just to give back to any specific type of person, but to give back to folks that was in need, right? Regardless of race, regardless of political affiliations, all of that stuff. It was just basically giving back to another child of God. And I'd seen that everybody that I came in contact with, before I'd seen what their preferences were or their ideologies were, what I'd seen was another human being, another child of God, and there was something there that connected us. And so that started me on that journey, that why. And it just so happened that as a formerly convicted and incarcerated individual, I sat at the heart of the issue, and I couldn't just walk away from it, because it was a part of my life. It was who I am, and so I had to figure out, how to get out of it. And in that process, I used a technique or just the principles that we are all God's children. I don't have a monopoly on the suffering. And I definitely don't have a monopoly on the solution, right? And so I know that if we're going to do this, we had to do this together. But ironically, when I started out, the narrative would have me think that this was solely an African-American issue. But as I started traveling the state of Florida, what I seen was that there were way more white folks who were impacted, and a lot of them didn't think like me, but they suffered just like me. They may not have had the same experiences that I had, but they were suffering in their reality. And so I had to, but I really had to just really understand that, at the end of the day, what we seen was another human being in need.
Thank Thank you. If you'd like to.
I mean, when I think about the why of bridging, I think we were kind of talking about this a little bit earlier, is holding this notion that behind every political reality or manifestation of violence or pain is a spiritual conundrum. And if we only respond to the political reality or the manifestation of violence, we will simply just start off another process that ultimately will create more manifestations of violence and political rallies down the road. And so I think for us, and for me, the why behind bridging was recognizing that we are in a very complicated world and scenario where if we don't figure out how to rediscover our interrelatedness to one another across difference, then we simply will perpetuate the same world that some of us are already victims of. And to, in some of my, spiritual language, since I am the one up here with the collar on, I would say I think there's a real important lesson from the Jewish scriptures and the stories around this notion of leaving an oppressive place and going in search of a promised land. And oftentimes, I think why we have to bridge is because what's the purpose of getting to the promised land if you become Pharaoh on your sojourn? Right? So I think there's this deeper ontological question around who we need to become and how do we need to develop the kind of imagination to bridge across difference where we can become hard on systems, still remain soft on people, and don't lose our ability to see the humanity of those who are different from us. Because I think when we do that, no matter what political reality we achieve, we will have already lost.
I told you they were amazing. Next question. I think the videos, some of the things I really loved in the videos are in the Pico video when you all talked about this is really about who we're called to be in this moment. And I'm wondering, Jen, if you could talk a little bit about what it is specifically that you all are doing around bridging and looking to do in the next few years.
Can I make a little confession first? Ears perked up. So when I first heard Ben and his counterpart Joseph say to us, what we really need to ask is who we need to become, I was like, oh dear God. Did we just get real soft? Because I came into this work as an organizer to get political. I was interested in structural economy, the takedown of capitalism, structural racism, this kind of hardcore stuff in my mind. But 2 years ago, when the invitation came of like, who are we going to become, and this idea of bridging, I really thought, I'm not sure what to do with this. So in that frame of mind, it was really hard for me to take on this idea of the bridging as actually an urgent matter. So in some ways, I'm saying that because I want to invite some curiosity if you're feeling a little bit of that. Maybe you're here in this conference because you're not feeling a little bit of that. But if you happen to be, this for me has been a real journey into discovering precisely what Ben was talking about. That much of the political aspirations and social change aspirations that I hold very deeply must be met also with a spiritual transformation. And so the work that we're trying to do is help people not just understand it from an intellectual perspective, but actually experience it in their bodies and in their relationship with each other. So we have embarked on really probably a 5 to 10 year process. We've said 12 months in that video, but 6 weeks later we realized it wasn't going to be just 12 months. And what we're doing is we're inviting people into what we're calling bridging and belonging circles, where they are going to be in conversations. We're hoping to have 1,000 circles with 10 people, so 10,000 people this year going through an experience together that is about creating a shared sense of purpose, understanding each other's stories, recognizing the context in which we're living and why this matter is so deeply urgent, and how it is in fact connected to the structural changes that we are seeking to make. And we've got some big ones in California. We're going after Prop 13. You're on that train, right? You're going after Prop 13. We're going after criminal justice system. We're defending immigrants. We're going after renter protections. These are not small issues with small opposition. And yet, we're seeing that the pathway for us to be able to build the kind of power that we truly and authentically need to accomplish these things together are only going to be found in our ability to awaken the power within and between us that requires bridging.
Yeah, yeah.
That's right.
Neal, in the video and in your work, at the heart of it, what you all are doing and have been doing is really centering some of the most impacted people. So could you talk a little bit about what bridging has looked like for you all and is looking like in this moment and moving forward?
Yeah, well, one, thanks for the question. Thanks for being here. It's great to see everybody. Love hearing these conversations. For us, this whole movement really has been built along the lines of humanity, right? And built on the pain that Desmond kind of talked about, right? Because at the time, Florida was one of 4 states that permanently barred people from voting. And so you had millions of people and family members who were directly impacted by these policies. And what we saw over time, and what we saw when I met Desmond in 2015, was that the disenfranchisement, this idea that our identities were impacted by these policies. Like, we weren't allowed to be Republicans or Democrats in our state. We didn't have a voice. So what binded us together was our shared humanity. And over time, we have our shirts, "Let My People Vote," and having a white guy walk around in some events with a "Let My People Vote" on shirt, it stirred these conversations that got to the core of belonging, right? We're a part of the same movement. And ultimately, we realized when we all talked about us belonging together, white, black, gay, straight, we were all disenfranchised. We also began to see that we were an example to the rest of the state, that we could operate along the lines of humanity and transcend some of these divisions along race, the divisions along economics, the divisions along partisanship. Those are real issues, and that's a part of our conversations. But we were able to walk in such a way that I think a lot of people were like, wow, what's that all about? And you end up in November with 65% of the vote and 40% of the people who voted for the Republican governor candidate voting for Amendment 4. And that led to some even more wonderful conversations about how we all belong together. So as we look forward, we're going to continue to do the same things that we've done, which is build a movement around people and along the lines of humanity. And then what we do is we also talk from the frame of reference of values. We would walk throughout the state and talk about things like when the debt's paid, it's paid, and that this was an everybody movement, that it was a movement of all walks of life. And we realized that when you meet somebody face to face, you meet them at the coffee shop, you meet them where they are, as human to human, that suddenly a lot of those differences melt away, and we can rally around simple values that propel us into the ability to change policy that impacts millions of lives. So that's kind of the heartbeat behind what we're doing.
Thank you. So the work that you all are doing is really pushing out the boundaries of what we imagine to be both politically feasible and viable, and what we just imagine to be. I'm wondering, Jen, if you could talk a little bit about how this changes sort of the traditional ways that we approach our work in the field.
Yeah, well, if you couldn't tell from my earlier comments, I run our political shop at Pico, California. And so, I came into this year really prepared to talk about voting and to talk about winning stuff at the state legislature. And we're counting votes essentially all the time in one way or another. And the tools that we use to count votes are very transactional. It's like check here for yes, check there for no. And when we started this conversation about bridging and belonging, first I was like, oh yeah, we'll just like add the adjective at the beginning of our statement or at the end or something, right? Like oh yeah, this is about bridging. Will you sign here now? So, you know, and I was by this time I was on board. You know, I had gotten a little bit of, Ben is a very convincing person, and I was on board and my spirit was in it, but my mind hadn't yet gotten around to the fact that in order, Reverend Trina, who was one of our executive directors, laughing because she knows this is true, but I hadn't gotten my mind around the fact that in fact, it's not just a word or a communication style that we needed to change. We actually needed to change, we still need to change every aspect of the organization because our organization wasn't designed to do bridging work. Our organization was designed to operate in a breaking world and to perpetuate that breaking world in ways that we weren't even and still probably aren't aware of. We're having to rethink the kind of tools we're using to talk to people at the doors about how they're going to vote. We're going to transform the technological tools we're using, the material tools. We're having to rethink about how are we training folks, not in the 2-hour version of a training, but we're going to need to deeply involve them months and months earlier in order for them to be prepared in their heart and mind to go to people whom they may not know and engage them in a totally different way. This is requiring a top to bottom evaluation of all the kinds of work that we're doing and how we do it, so that we can actually deeply, deeply embody the bridging because we are confronting a breaking world, and that means we need to be able to be prepared for when that breaking happens for us to respond in a totally different way. So that is also requiring a lot of negotiation with our partners who don't necessarily think that we're on to the, you know, just want the numbers of voters, for example. And I'm laughing with Aparna because we are partners in that work. And we're having to recalibrate all of the commitments we've made and start to renegotiate them as well. We think that it will result in a better outcome. Then in fact we'll be able to achieve our shared goals if we can do this work, but it's going to take us a minute to figure out how.
So that question kind of perked me up a little bit because, you know, when you think about, you know, Florida, you think about felons, you think about voting. Those are like 3 toxic subjects, right? And you put those 3 together, especially in this type of political climate, I mean, that's a recipe for disaster. There is no way that some amendment to restore voting rights to 1.4, there's no way that should even get on the ballot. There's no way that should even come close to passing. But it did, and it did with no opposition. You know, it did with endorsements from Christian Coalition, even from the Koch brothers, right? Our naturally perceived like opposition. And that experience of the campaign, and I'm talking about experience from the time it was birthed through a vision that God gave me to what happened on November, you know, it opened my eyes to a lot of things. And it really, you know, challenged me to, you know, challenge folks in our campaign that maybe we first need to start, number one, looking more internally, right? And rethinking what the opposition really is. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of folks would be surprised to know that 95% of the heartache that I received did not come from opposition. It came from allies and friends. Right. You know, and to understand that some of the people that stood in the paint, when you talk about a person who I call my brother, Neal, you know, you have a white conservative guy that I was brought up to believe that we're not even supposed to be sitting next to each other. You know, and so when we learned that, you know, when we start looking internal, because it's internal where we can solve the majority of our problems, we start seeing about these labels that some puppet master up there have us buy into, right? Whether it's a progressive label that changes every 2 or 3 years, you know, so I don't even understand that piece, but what it does is that when we, and that was the difference with our campaign, because when we launch things, we tend to label ourselves. And when we do that, we eliminate or we limit who can talk to us and who we can talk to, right? And so we automatically start out with separation. You know what I'm saying? It's you guys and it's us. We launched in a way that removed every label. We wouldn't even let our executive committee or anybody label us as a bipartisan campaign or even a nonpartisan campaign. We insisted that it was led with people. And so it was an organic, grassroots movement that welcomed and enjoyed bipartisan support. We led with the people because we believed that if we lead with people first over all these other labels, then that allows us to have to come in close proximity with other people and have real live conversations with folks, and that's where the transformation happens, right? It allows us that proximity.
Yeah, I mean, I would just want to build on what Dee is saying. I think it's incredibly important, particularly for those of us that are in the center-left organizing political movement, right? Because we've figured out how to activate people by, at times, leveraging breaking and othering, right? So we're going to talk about the boogeyman that's in the closet and get everybody all woke up and throw some hot rhetoric at folks and get people all agitated and irritated and, you know, they're supposed to be coming to us to figure out how to build some power. And we get folks activated, right? And we'll get people to win that short-lived political gain, but we haven't even figured out how to help folks bridge in the center-left movement, right? Like oftentimes when we had a conversation about bridging, right, people are like, you know, so you want us to go talk to, you know, some racist folks sitting somewhere on the, you know, on the back stairs with a Confederate flag smoking a stogie. That's not the conversation we saying might need to happen. That's a conversation that needs to happen. But what we're also offering is we have invited people into transactional relationships for the purpose of accomplishing a political goal. And as soon as that electoral or legislative campaign is over, those transactional relationships dissipate. And I don't know about you, but as a black dude that's living in this society, I don't need no allies. I need siblings. I need relatives. I need people that are willing to be down, not when it's politically convenient, right? I need people that's willing to stand on the front lines with me in Ferguson. I need people that's also willing to come to the table and have conversations with folks with power. We've got to figure out how to bridge even in our movements and deal with the breaking that's happening across race, across identity, across status, across ideas. We know the people closest to the problem are closest to the solutions, but we haven't figured out how to really create the kind of space that's necessary that centers formerly incarcerated and directly impact the folks in our movements. So the bridging work we need to do is not just about in service to a campaign or verbal judo or learning how to say the right thing or say a different thing. We got to figure out how to become different versions of ourselves as a movement, as a collective, right? It doesn't mean that we all got to do the same thing, but we all got to do something. And I think in this moment, it is incredibly critical that we figure out how to bridge within our movements, how to figure out how to hold space together so that the goal is not just about passing the legislation, which is important, but how do we also begin to think about redefining the win? And what if the win is not just about what happens on the voting day, but what if the win is about us rediscovering our heritage, that we belong to one another? And no matter what this evil system tells us, we can hold on to that and live from that reality.
Wow. Yeah.
Right on.
That's it.
I told you he's very convincing. Yeah.
Follow that one.
Well, it makes me think of yesterday evening for folks that were here in the room, for the FIRE panel, just like this one, with Sisters Morningstar, Linda, Charlene, and Saru. FIRE. And I think it was Sister Linda who said, we don't need more allies. We need to, that's what you said, we need to know that when we are fighting, that you will be right next to me and have my back, no matter what it is. And that's what we've been hearing for the last 3 days. That this is about where we find ourselves belly button to belly button with each other, or side by side with each other, and that we know we will fight for each other. We will, last night the words were fighting, sacrificing, laying down, and being with each other in struggle and in liberation. So that, I think, is the extraordinary power of what you are all doing. Having said that, I'm wondering if you all could talk a little bit about what does it mean and what does it take for the kind of sort of public commitment that you were talking about as PICO, and then what you all are doing. What is the next, not incremental, but the next transformative leap that includes all of us, that includes our whole selves and our whole communities?
Talk about a leap. I believe that, what the world seen in November when Amendment 4 passed was something greater than just a reenfranchisement of 1.4 million folks. We had over 5.1 million votes, right? And there were 1 million more votes than any candidate received on that ballot. But those 5.1 million votes was not based on hate. They weren't based on fear. Those were votes that was based on love, forgiveness, and redemption, right? And so when I hear that word leap, and you talk about what does it take, the first thing that came to my mind is courage. But I think it's courage not to necessarily take a leap, but to go back, right? To go back to our natural state.
Yes, sir.
Right? And what I mean by that, and because in a lot of these spaces we're indoctrinated with some rhetoric that causes division. But if any one of us leave right now and we get on the expressway and we run across an accident, and we get out of our car to help, we run up to that person, that first question is not going to be, did you vote for Donald Trump? It's not going to be how much you make. That first question is going to be, are you okay? How can I help? That is something that's just naturally within us. When I think about the hurricanes a couple years back, that image of that African-American man in a boat rescuing a white guy in Texas and stopped to let him go back to get his Confederate flag. In spite of the hate and the racism that flag represented, he was able to, in that moment, overlook that, and what he seen was another human being in need. And I don't think that it's a leap for us to get there. I think that is something that is naturally within us. And so you want to talk about the next big thing is how do we reawaken what God has naturally placed inside of us?
Talk to him.
And that is that disposition to care about our fellow man in spite of what they may do, they may say, or how they may act. How do we love each other? And I think that the awakening of love was on full display in November. And we are very hopeful, and we have the faith to believe that it is a start in turning this country in the right direction, understanding that it's a very simple premise. There is no me without you. None. And so I must want for my neighbor what I want for myself, and I must commit myself to making sure that I am advocating and I'm fighting so that my neighbor is treated with dignity and respect, no matter what their gender is, no matter what their race is, no matter what their status is, that they're a human being, another child of God, and they deserve me standing in the paint for them.
So one of the things that you're making me think about is this practice we're starting to do together in our organization, which is when we get triggered, turn to wonder. And I've been thinking about that a lot in this context, because oftentimes the thing that we'll do is we turn to aggression and enact, with or without meaning to, some kind of breaking behavior. And this idea of, can I be curious? Can I be curious about somebody else? And can I be curious about myself? Like, what's in me that reacts in that way? And can I understand it more deeply and choose, not react, but choose something else? And we've been talking a lot about that and as building that into our practice and organizational practice, because it's in that breath that maybe God can be, and again, I'm also going to speak from my spiritual understanding, is that the divine can enter into the space and help us take that leap forward. I don't think that I have it in me yet, but if I invite the breath, maybe it will be given to me.
Yeah, I must say, when I hear these stories, I think about the first time I got involved in this movement in 2015. You know, I had gotten a felony conviction 13 years ago, and part of my experience was that I moved to Florida before I even knew that I wouldn't be able to vote, and active in conservative politics for a long time. The first job I got was at my church, and I began to feel that family feeling. And one of my fellow family members ended up getting in trouble. He took a phone from McDonald's right after high school graduation. And in context, please know, by that point, several people had suggested that I get involved in this movement, and I was in this spot of still dealing with my own shame and my anger and how I let people down, and so I didn't want to get involved. But it was watching a young man go to jail for 40 days for taking a phone, and the family reaction, and realizing that if he looked like me as a white guy, he was going to have a much different experience than I did. And we were family, and we know each other, we're still friends, our families talked in the last week. And so for me, it was no surprise that 3 days later, I happened to be on a college campus and Desmond's there. He's talking about this felon disenfranchisement issue. And I walked into the room, and the truth is, right away, I felt a little progressive-y to me, right? And that isn't my background, so I'm being vulnerable here. And I'm like, oh no, I think I might be the only fire hydrant at the all-dog party. And within 30 seconds, no lie, and from that moment going forward, Desmond created an environment in which I belonged. Like, I knew that my story mattered in this space, and from every moment going forward to collecting petitions at Trump rallies and going to biker events and we had fishing tournaments with folks, you know, who became a part of a movement that was transcended kind of what we typically think. And it rallied around people, and it rallied around some common ideas about expanding democracy and ideas that our voices matter. And I think there's real power in that when you can kind of connect. And we're encouraged about that going forward, because we're starting to hear some of the same naysayers. Like, you can't build a movement that transcends all these differences. We've heard it once before, and now as we move forward, you start to hear some of that again. And I think we're pretty excited about the opportunity to try and keep moving forward in a way that puts people first and then can transform policies, not just change them on the margins, but really transform our criminal justice system in the state, really transform the way we see each other, and move the state forward in the process. So I'm always grateful to him because of that environment he set in the very first meeting that I think reflects kind of some of the things that we're talking about.
I really love all of this, and particularly the idea that we have to start with ourselves, and that we start here, and then that is where we go out from, and that from this transformation at the individual and internal level comes out all the way into the systemic and the structural and the global change that we're all here to make happen for that collective future for our next 7 generations. So I'm wondering if you could share, I know our time is coming to a close, if y'all could share a little bit about your vision moving forward, about what it is that you imagine, that you hope, that you dream, that you know we will accomplish together, and how you will get there.
Everybody, I'm going to turn you on to a black church for a moment. Don't worry, you'll be all right.
Preach.
Everybody say build,
Bill,
say bridge,
bridge,
say belong.
belong.
So I think as we're thinking about moving forward and thinking about what our vision is, we need to figure out how to travel the journey to build a shared identity. Doesn't mean that we're disappearing the beautiful tribal identities that we all come from and come through. I'm black, been black my whole life, never want to be nothing else, right? And they certainly ain't gonna let me be nothing else, but I don't want to be nothing else either, right? But we need to figure out how to build a shared identity that is made up of our collective experiences, and we've got to do that by bridging across differences. Learning how to build muscle memory in us so that we're learning how to turn to wonder, how to bridge with folks who are different from us, so that ultimately we don't just sit around the table and have a kumbaya moment, but we can create structures and systems of belonging. And so that is, I think, the vision that really inspires me. I don't want to dethrone the people who are in power right now just to become them. And then to create a whole new caste system of oppressed people. The thing that scares me and keeps me up at night is I could look at the white, evangelical, red hat wearing conservatives and see the toxicity in their language, in their behavior, and many of them can't see it. Right? I've been in a relationship with a lot of these folks that can't see it. My fear is that in 40 years, if we're not careful, if we don't put love at the center of our work, we will be the blue hat wearing progressives who are full of the same kind of toxicity and not be able to know it. That's what keeps me up at night. So I think our vision is to figure out how do we bring love back, where when you're talking about love, it don't feel like you soft now, you done gave up the movement and you ain't trying to be about that life. We all way about that life, but we need to figure out how to put love back at the center of our movement and really trust in the power of the human spirit to be able to bring us forward. We need to be working with all of y'all across not just this state, but across this country and start a movement of love and belongingness, get people to build, bridge, and belong so that we can figure out how we save the spirit of this nation.
And I'll just add on one thing. I think our vision is that we in California are creating a state of belonging. That our aspiration is that it's not belongingness between you and me, but that our state becomes one that reflects belonging in all of its systems. I think of neighborhoods and wanting to see people in homes and with good jobs and kids going to great schools and healthy, and we're diverse and we're not afraid of each other walking down the street. How can we create, we need to create a state of belonging, and part of the way we're going to be able to do it is through this bridging work and changing the systems that right now force us into these different spaces away from each other. So our vision is really over the next 20 years that California becomes a state of belonging for everybody.
Yeah, I personally don't have enough time to tell you the whole thing, but let me see if I could give you at least a portion of it. And just like Brother Ben, definitely love is at the center of all that we do. But what I see is that, one of the things I even tell my staff is that don't just identify the problem, come with the solution. Yeah. And sometimes we're so geared up to think that our purpose is to create the problem or to address the problem, or, you know what I'm saying, or make the problem known. But, we believe our purpose is to come to a solution, right? And so I could be soft on love, but that love got empowered 1.4 million Floridians in Florida. You know what I'm saying? And I think that at the end of the day, it's about changing people's lives. And so how do we be courageous enough to create a dynamic where, and we've had this happen to us where we actually did a liberation training, and in that training was some white country guys, conservative guys that was a big Donald Trump fan or whatever, but he was in that training with us as a brother. And at the end of that training, we did that centering piece that we always do, and that stuck with him. And he talked about how it reminded him of that moment when he goes hunting, right before a deer comes into the line of the scope. That moment of peace, and how when the trainer who was a Black Lives Matter, Black Liberation trainer, didn't even know that he had somebody like that in the training, found out in the proximity how both of them learned. How that person that was so used to having an enemy and having a vision of a picture of an enemy realized that he was fellowshipping with the same person that he'd been trained to hate. And all he could think about was love for that person and how that person transformed him. We can learn from each other, right? And we can transform each other and not be scared of that transformation, right? And I think if we're in that space, we get that courage that we would find that we have more that are in common with each other than what separates us. And I think that that is the power that takes us over that edge where we're able to shed the labels, right, and hold on to humanity as our driving force.
Thank you. I think that's right. I think there's real power in being in proximity to people who see things differently and do things differently. I know I struggle with kind of self-selection, like what I watch, what I see, that I naturally want to take in information and then I process it in a certain way. Desmond has been one of the biggest blessings in my entire life. He's a brother. I love him. He's family. And we have family all around us who see and operate a little bit differently, but that the lines of humanity are so tight, and we've built this kind of network of folks who have shared experiences, but also have different experiences. And I think that gets to your point, man. That was so cool to hear you say, kind of cast that vision, because I think that I see a lot of that toxicity. And we can do better. Like, the truth is, we don't all have to disagree, and sometimes you just got to vote it out, right? And count the votes and move on. And then there's other times where you can talk about transcendent conversations like this one. And I know I'm going to walk away from it because I've had to learn. That moment I described about before meeting Des, I knew there was a grace side, I knew there was a justice side, and I knew that there was a mercy side to this entire Amendment 4 walk. But I've had to learn a little bit more about the justice side growing up the way that I grew up, with, being a white guy and my life experiences. And so being able to have grace to walk into that learning without, that allowed us to grow tighter and grow forward as opposed to, trigger each other in certain ways. The last thing I would say is I would walk at a lot of doors and a lot of conservative places, and people would say, hey, you did the crime, you did the time, that kind of deal. And I had to learn how to ask questions in that moment. Like, I'm somebody asking for grace, so it's like, okay, and Des is so good at this. Ask them, give them grace. Well, why do you think that? And over and over and over again with one conversation, you could see somebody go from a no to a yes. And that's the difference between bad policy and good policy.
That's good. I gotta share this because he said Neal said he had to learn. Let me tell you all. When Neal first came on to the FRC, one of the first things I did, I called him up one day and said, Neal, I need you to drive a van of our leaders to Alabama to work on that, I think Doug Jones, the campaign, right? And Neal was like, sure. Little did he know I was sticking him in a van full of African Americans, half of them straight Black liberators, right? And here's this guy having to drive a van full of African American liberators to Alabama with stops at the Edmunds Pettus Bridge, right? And so he was forced to be in proximity, and I didn't tell him, but let me tell you, when he came back, it was like what Moses probably looked like after he had that encounter with the burning bush. I tell you. But that proximity is so crucial. Yeah. It's so crucial.
So sadly, we have to wrap up because the time is ticking down so quickly. Before I ask you all for final comments, I want to take the invitation that Jennifer offered us to take a breath together. So we've heard about an invitation to step fully into our own and into our collective spirit, into our own and our collective grace. and into our own and our collective courage. So I just want to ask all of you if you could take 1 minute, which I know will put us over our time, to just give us your final comments today, knowing that this conversation and this work and these bonds that we are building and have built will continue hopefully much longer than any of us are alive, and much longer than our children and our children's children, whether birthed or chosen, are alive.
I guess I could go real quick and just say that this conversation, this experience, this shared experience has been inspiring and encouraging to me. And I feel like I'm learning, and I love that moment because that means that real relationships are happening and that the door's open and that give and take is going on. And so that we truly do belong together in that way. And so I'm just really grateful to be here. And
All right, so obviously he ceded some of that time to me because it's just a minute. So those of us who are parents out here probably heard this before. If we don't have that conversation with our children about sex, somebody else will, right? And I think that applies also to the work that we're doing, because what we've seen even in the last election was that we had ignored a subsection of people, right? And somebody came along and spoke to them. Might not have been telling them the right things, but somebody spoke to people who were ignored. And so I think it is vitally important that we expand who we talk to, because what we have inside of us and the love that we have inside of us should not just be contained to just a certain set of people. It should be spread out with everyone. And so I want to just leave you all with that. Don't be afraid to talk to the stranger. Talk to people who might not agree with you or might not look like you. Because if what you have is pure, and if your intentions is really grounded in love for humanity, love for a better world, then some of that will rub off and it will be transformational. That encounter will cause people to shift.
I love being on this journey, and at times it's very challenging, but I love that when you talked about it's the invitation to transform oneself. So I feel deeply grateful for this conversation and for the journey that we're on together.
I would just say as my final word that we are exactly who we need in this moment. There's nobody else coming, and we actually don't need anybody else to come. Everything that is necessary for us to move into our tomorrow is here in our today. So may we trust the power of the divine that is within us and all around us, and let's be willing to take some risks that challenge the status quo. Let's commit ourselves to being prophetic voices over religious echoes, and let's figure out recognizing that hope is always living in our proverbial neighborhoods, but it doesn't make it into our reality unless we cross the street. Let's make some bold steps in our organizations, in our communities, in the way in which we relate to one another to take some steps, and let's manifest the world that we all want to belong to.